Russia's still in the game. China's in the game in a non-transparent way. Uh, Japan has decided to hoist their gold flag. Turkey's buying gold. The other one we know they're buying, but we don't know how much. They're not transparent. Is Iran. So the central bank acquisition of gold is still going very strongly. They're still in the game. What gold has actually been doing, it's not straight down, not even close. It is trading in a range. It's a broad range. The central tendency is $1,800 an ounce. The high end of the range is about $1,900 an ounce. The low end is $1,700 an ounce. It's a big range. That's 11% or 5.5% on either side of the central tendency. If you look at a chart, are there a couple peaks where it just kind of got over 1900? Yeah. A couple lows, 1678 where it went below 1700. Yeah. But they were all like a day or two, and then it kind of got back in that range. And so so that's important because gold is actually going sideways. It's going sideways around the central tendency of $1,800 an ounce with a lot of volatility, but it's staying in that range. So you look at the chart, what's fascinating is not, gold is down over that entire period from the peak. Yeah. But since the drawdown was mostly between August 8th, 2020 and the end of September 2020. That happened pretty quickly. And then it just got in this range I'm talking about, and up and down with a lot of volatility in the range. It's a paradox. On the one hand, you're kind of going sideways, but on the other hand, there's a lot of vol in the range. So if I'm not a day trader, I recommend gold for portfolios, and I think that's pretty well known. And I recommend a 10% allocation. That's pretty well known. But boy, if you were a day trader and you just bought the dips, you would have made a fortune in this because that pattern has persisted for really 14 months at this point. There are far more interesting things going on in central bank gold accumulation. One of the things I was looking at Russia, because Russia it was just like clockwork. They were buying, between 10 and 30 tons a month for almost 10 years. It was, they obviously had standing orders with the dealers. They don't want to disrupt the market. They were highly transparent. So, my friend Nabil, I call her the only central banker who actually knows what she's doing, was just like accumulate. And then China is the opposite. They've been accumulating, but completely non-transparent. I know who their agents are. I know how they do it. But, then every 5 years they say, oh, we got 1,000 tons. Well, really, did you do that overnight, or have you been accumulating for 5 years and now you decide to tell us? Well, obviously it's the latter. But the Russians are kind of more interesting because you have a lot more information. And what the Russians did after 10 years of accumulation, they just stopped cold in around January 2021. And they didn't sell, but they just stopped buying, which is interesting. So I looked at their reserve position and I could see why, because they got gold to almost exactly 20% of their total reserves. For a round number, about 500 billion in reserves, of which 100 billion was in physical gold. So about 20%, about 2,400 tons, 2,500 tons, give or take. And they said that's enough. In other words, for the same reason I say for an individual portfolio, 10% is enough. And then people say, well, Jim, if you think gold's going higher, which I do, why not 50% or 100%? Because that never makes sense. You never want, you can be over allocated. You can be wrong also. You always have to factor that in. But they got to 20% and they just leveled off. They said, okay, we're there. And if you think about that, this is from a sovereign point of view. And this is how Putin thinks. Putin's two favorite sports are chess and jujitsu, martial arts. So it kind of tells you where he's coming from. So what they did, and they did it brilliantly, they created the perfect hedge. There's no such thing, but as good as it gets, we'll put it that way. By the way, they've been selling treasuries, reducing their exposure to US dollar instruments. That has more to do with sanctions and possible freezes than it does with asset allocation, but that's a factor. But they still have a large chunk of treasuries. But what do? They export oil. How is oil priced in dollars? So they've got a big dollar exposure and dollar revenues, dollar inflows, whether they like it or not, because oil is a dollar denominated market. But now they've got a big slug of gold. So one of two things is going to happen. Either the US is going to maintain the value of the dollar, in which case gold will probably kind of continue to go sideways. You won't regret the gold, but you won't be burned on the dollar. But that aside, If you believe the US will resort to inflation, which they will eventually, we're just not there yet. This is a timing issue. Then what's going to happen to your dollar assets? They're going to be worth less. But what's going to happen to your gold? It's going to scream. It's going to go to the moon. So there they are. If the dollar's solid, they got a really nice diversified position. And if we resort to inflation, their gold's going to go up and the dollar price of oil is going to go up. So they've got a beautiful hedge. This is like a masterpiece of hedging and wealth preservation on a going forward basis, which is what a reserve position or sovereign wealth fund, as the case may be, is supposed to do. So the Russians have handled this in a masterful way. But while I'm looking at all this Russian data, something just jumped off the page. And I was like, whoa, because I hadn't, followed it, and there it was. Japan has been running at about 600 metric tons forever. I look back like 30 years and it hadn't gone up. I suppose you could go back 40, but it was just like the 600 tons. All of a sudden, Japan's position goes up 80 tons, like boom, like almost to 700, and in 1 month. I said, well, like the Chinese, I know you didn't buy it in 1 month. The market's liquid. It's not that liquid. You can't buy 80 tons. And then I looked into it. What they did, it was an accounting entry where they had the gold in another account. And they did the accounting and moved it over to the reserve position of the Bank of Japan. By the way, China does the same thing. They have a sovereign wealth fund, State Administration of Foreign Exchange, run by an ex-PIMCO guy. And then they have the People's Bank of China. Everyone looks at the PBOC, but which is, they have a website, but SAFE is non-transparent. So when you see these big jumps in Chinese gold, it's an accounting entry moving it from SAFE to the People's Bank of China, and then boom, but it's been in the safe literally all along. Well, Japan did the same thing. Now, I don't know where the gold came from, what side account or ledger or whatever inside the MOF, the Ministry of Finance, but they had it, and the 50-ton shows up. So then you have to ask yourself, okay, got it. Why now? Why did they decide to print? Sorry, I misspoke. I said 50. It was 80. Why did they decide to print an 80-ton increase when they had the gold all along? Why now? Well, look at Afghanistan. Look at the U.S. humiliation. Look at China on the march, flying 86, their equivalent of an F-35 over Taiwanese airspace. The AU-KUS deal, giving Australia nuclear-powered submarines. The Quad, getting India. If you're Japan, suddenly you might have to, become a nuclear power. You might have to go it on your own, go along. And if you're China, you're going to invade Taiwan. Why stop there? I mean, once you start World War III, you might as well invade Japan. So Japan felt they had to make a statement, and they did, but they did it in gold. So is Kevin right about 1 quarter? Sure, but the central banks have not walked away. In fact, if anything, by the way, Russia's resumed buying recently. Russia's still in the game. China's in the game in a non-transparent way. Japan has decided to hoist their gold flag. Turkey's buying gold. The other one we know they're buying, but we don't know how much. They're not transparent, is Iran. So the central bank acquisition of gold is still going very strongly. They're still in the game. I also disagree a little bit with the Bitcoin thing. I mean,